Welcome to the Alaska Weather Show. I'm meteorologist Peter Chan, coming to you from the National Weather Service on this Tuesday, April 11th, 2023. And a quick program note coming up for Thursday evening, not tomorrow, Wednesday, but Thursday evening, April 13th. We are going to have potentially the Alaska Weather Show running late. If you view the show through KTOO 360 TV, it'll be following the coverage of some of the Alaska State legislature coverage that they'll have coming up during that time frame. So potentially the show will be airing a little later on Thursday evening for those of you who get it through KTOO 360 TV. Now, if you'd like additional weather information on top of what I provide, you can always go to weather.gov. This is the National Weather Service's online presence. It'll bring you to a map of the continental U.S. with Alaska and Hawaii to the lower left, and you point and click anywhere on this map. It'll pull up a forecast for very specific areas anywhere in the country, along with any relevant watches, warnings, or advisories. A quick check of the lower 48 on this Tuesday afternoon. Of most significant note are the warm temperatures here across the central portion of the country through the plains. This area of warm air is heading off toward the east, northeast, and with temperatures in the 70s and some 80s, along with breezy conditions, very dry conditions, we have critically high fire danger across the central plains back down into the eastern Colorado, northeast New Mexico. In fact, as that warm air works eastward, Chicago will likely have temperatures in the lower 80s tomorrow, Wednesday into Thursday. So some unusually warm air for the early season. Now, here in Alaska, we're dealing with plenty of cold air, persistent cold across the northwestern quadrant of the mainland. Selawik was down to 38 below zero this morning, 34 below at Noatak, and a little place outside of Selawik reported an unofficial low of 43 below at Paragon Creek. So that's some really cold air, and we're expecting more snow, accumulating snow along areas of the west and southwest coast that'll spread inland, especially on the west and north sides of the Alaska Range, but also down into areas of the Susitna Valley. Show you that in a moment. And we've had a volcanic eruption, Shivalach out in the far eastern Russia, the Kamchatka Peninsula, erupted a couple days ago and has sent a pretty significant ash plume about 35,000 feet into the air. So I'll show you what areas are being impacted by that. And then below normal temperatures will likely continue across much of the mainland through pretty much this month, which is going to delay the river breakup. We're not going to see any widespread heavy snow melt anytime soon. It may be gradual. Doesn't mean we can't get some days near normal temperatures with some snow melt, but we're not looking at a widespread melting event that would lead to a sudden river breakup at this point, at least for the next couple of weeks. Anvik reporting some light snow this Tuesday afternoon, 7 above. That's the leading edge of that moisture coming in up through the southwest and west coast. McGrath will see the snow developing soon. As much as 6 to 10 inches could fall there. Winter weather advisories are in effect through the day Wednesday. And also up through the Sitna Valley, Talkeetna reporting a steady light snow this Tuesday afternoon, 26 degrees. And way in the southeast, Hoona there in the Panhandle enjoying sunny skies, a temperature at 46 degrees. And here are the current winter weather advisories in yellow. These here through the lower Yukon from the Delta on up to around Anvik and McGrath. 3 to 6 inches most areas, but as much as 6 to 10 could fall around McGrath due to some upslope in terrain enhancement to the precipitation. And then the areas along the Alaska Range and to the north up through Tanana, Fairbanks, the Yukon Flats could pick up at least 3 to 5 inches of snow, a little bit more in a few spots. And Talkeetna and the Susitna Valley, also in this area, could receive several inches of snow through at least midday Wednesday as a result of this frontal system working its way eastward. Further south and west, special weather statement for areas along and inland from Bristol Bay and Kuskokwim Bay. We expect some light accumulating snow along with some blowing snow as well as that frontal system works its way north and east this evening into the early morning hours of Wednesday. So quick check here of where this volcanic eruption is. The volcano Shevelac is located here on the Kamchatka Peninsula, and at least as of earlier this afternoon, the ash plume had gotten up to about 36,000 feet. It has since come down to 31,000 feet, and we've had some pilot reports of that ash, mainly gas, not so much the volcanic ash, reach as far east now as Shemya to just west of Adak. So this area here of the western Aleutians, and the upper level winds will cause this plume to drift eastward over the next couple of days. So the Alaska Aviation Weather Unit of the National Weather Service will keep a very close eye on that. Another thing I want to pass along, just where we are in terms of aurora viewing and moon phase. There is a chance of a glancing blow from a coronal mass ejection coming up here as we go through tonight. If skies are clear, you might notice a little enhancement to the aurora. Possibility, small chance of a minor geomagnetic storm. Otherwise, new moon occurs next week, Wednesday on April 19th. Aurora viewing season, though, will be ending by the end of the month just due to the lengthening daylight and the shortening of darkness at night. So we have at least a couple more weeks potentially of seeing a good aurora display if the sun can hurl us a disturbance that would trigger that. But here on the map, the satellite imagery this afternoon, we have a secondary low developing around Kodiak Island that'll push into the Gulf, front arcing back here along the southwest coast and extending out to another weak low near Nunavik Island, and then the main low here back out toward the western half of the Aleutians. Very cold air in place remains here across the northern portions of the state, centered on the northwest areas. And cold air will continue to just kind of sit here and kind of just inch eastward, and it'll lose some of its punch, but nevertheless unusually cold for this time of year. And then low pressure will take shape in the Gulf, not anything especially strong, but just a general area of low pressure will be there through the midweek period. So here is the surface map, secondary low, triple point low there near Kodiak Island. That will work its way on up into the western Gulf by early Wednesday morning. The front that extends back along it will just kind of deteriorate to a trough by Wednesday afternoon. This other low sitting here through the central Bering is not especially strong, with just surrounded by some snow showers or mixed rain and snow showers further south. The low in the northern Gulf will kind of just move up toward the northeastern Gulf and northern portion of the Panhandle and weaken as we go into Thursday. And then just a weak low lingers back toward the western Gulf for Thursday afternoon, with cold air continuing to sit here up across areas of the northwestern half of the state. Temperature-wise, we are looking for lows near freezing across the Panhandle, maybe a little below. Not as cold across the south-central interior as it was. Lows generally above 20 south of the Alaska Range. Temperatures on Wednesday afternoon should be getting back up above freezing in many areas, mid-upper 30s, even some isolated 40-degree readings. Some 40-degree readings again across the Panhandle. And then low temperatures Thursday morning, comparable teens, 20s on the south side of the Alaska Range. Upper 20s from Anchorage on over toward Valdez, Cordova. And we expect temperatures to be a little above freezing across much of the Panhandle. And then temperatures Thursday afternoon getting back up into the 40s across much of the Panhandle, maybe flirting with 40 around the Anchorage Bowl, back down along the west side of the Kenai. Temperatures are going to moderate a bit. Average high temperatures for this area this time of year, lower mid-40s, so we're going to stay below normal there. This is where the cold air will continue to be. Wednesday morning lows still could be some isolated 30-degree below readings in this area. Otherwise, temperatures warmest south of the Yukon River, say along the Alcan border, 36 at Eagle and Northway. And then nighttime lows again Thursday morning below zero here across much of the North Slope, Arctic coast down through the Seward Peninsula into the west central interior. And daytime highs only in the single digits above or below zero here in the north and northwest, including the Seward Peninsula. Back up around 30 or so, Fairbanks toward the Alcan border. And across the southwest, temperatures tonight will get down the single digits in some areas along north of the Yukon River. Teens, 20s elsewhere, above freezing along the southern portion of the Alaska Peninsula and Aleutians. And with the frontal system that's worked its way up further north and east, temperatures along the Alaska Peninsula back through the eastern Aleutians should generally be in the low, even some isolated isolated mid-40s. And Thursday morning lows still chilly as you go up on the south and east side of Norton Sound, a bit below zero. And temperatures, once you get toward Dillingham and, say King Salmon, you should be near and above 30 as you extend out along the Alaska Peninsula. Warmest temperatures Thursday afternoon will be along the east side of the Alaska Range through King Salmon down along the Alaska Peninsula, mid-30s to lower 40s in that area. So nothing really changing. The extended temperature outlook, 6 to 10 day, April 17th through the 21st, below normal temperatures across most of the state, centered on the south, central areas, and southwest. And if I advance this a few days forward, April 19th through the 25th, that's through the following weekend, almost the end of the month, below normal temperatures centered across southern Alaska, centered on Cook Inlet, Kenai Peninsula, Prince William Sound. Precipitation is going to average below normal here, the 17th through the 21st. It'll be a drier air mass, maybe a little above normal, eastern areas and the Alcan border, Fairbanks. And then as we go into April 19th through the 25th, near normal precipitation expected for much of the state.
And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
Let's take a look at your aviation weather. If you have a flight planned this midweek, either Wednesday or Thursday, we start out with IFR conditions early Wednesday morning from along the Alcan border to the north side of the Alaska Range and extending down along Bristol Bay, Nunavik Island, westward into the central Bering. Also an area around Prince William Sound in through the north central Gulf Coast into the central Gulf. And by Wednesday afternoon, conditions overall should improve, ceilings lifting in these areas to the west and much of the mainland, with either VFR or MVFR conditions anticipated. Still could be some IFR conditions, though, along areas of the Panhandle, especially in through the north and in the intercoastal mountains. Thursday early morning, we expect IFR conditions along central area of the North Slope and Brooks Range, as well as north end of the Alaska Peninsula and in toward the Bering Sea side, and also along the intercoastal mountains of the northeastern Gulf and down into the intercoastal mountains there of the inner channels there of the Panhandle. But by Thursday afternoon, we do anticipate overall much of the state either seeing VFR conditions, as will be the case through the central western Alaska Range, northwestward through the lower middle Yukon Valley, all the way up to the northwest coast, with areas of MVFR from the eastern Brooks Range and North Slope all the way down into the southeast interior and much of the Panhandle. Now, past conditions across areas of the east central Brooks Range, Anatuvik Pass, as well as Adigan Pass, will see MVFR conditions on Wednesday. Further south and west and the west arm of the Alaska Range in the morning, IFR conditions there at Lake Clark and Merrill, giving way to MVFR conditions by midday and afternoon. And same thing, Rainy Pass, IFR becoming MVFR. Also through the central Alaska Range, IFR conditions becoming MVFR at Windy Pass. Further east, generally MVFR conditions are anticipated around Isabel Pass. West of there could be some IFR conditions in the early morning. And then further east of Antasta Pass will generally be MVFR. Wouldn't even be surprised there could be a little VFR conditions there at times. And then further south and west, Tanita Pass should generally have MVFR conditions on Wednesday. And Portage will start out with IFR conditions across the eastern areas of the pass out into Prince William Sound, but giving way to MVFR conditions midday into the afternoon. And finally, Chilkoot and White in the far north part of the Panhandle will see MVFR conditions becoming IFR as we go through the day, especially by mid-afternoon into the early evening. Now, freezing levels, surface freezing line runs through the central Bering Sea between St. Matthew, St. Paul, along the Bristol Bay coastline, across through Shelikof Strait, along the east side of the Kenai Peninsula, on up into the northern Gulf Coast, and then the inner channels, intercoastal mountains of the Panhandle. Freezing levels do bump up a bit ahead of area of low pressure. There's a secondary triple point low with a front that'll be extending out into the Gulf, so we see a bump of freezing levels aloft at 2, 4, and even 6,000 feet as you get down there into the North Pacific. Greatest threat of icing will be along and ahead of this frontal band that's associated with the low that'll be out moving into the central Gulf. Generally above 4,000 feet, there could be some considerable moderate icing along areas of the north central, northeastern Gulf Coast down just to off of the areas, of the coastal areas of the Panhandle and Haida Gwaii, with a broad area of some isolated icing possible extending back in through much of the Bering above 3,000 feet. Upper level winds 30,000 feet. There is a jet core upwards of 140 knots, westerly winds along the Gulf, North Pacific interface south of the Alaska Peninsula, and then bringing it down to 700 millibars, 9,000 feet. We find a trough of low pressure extending from the north central mainland back toward the central Bering Sea, and south of that a broad area of 35, 40 knot winds over the Gulf. Also some winds locally 40 to in excess of 50 knots along the south end of the Alaska Peninsula and just south of the eastern Aleutians. And at 3,000 feet we find weak low circulation in the northeastern Gulf, and then back toward the central Bering north of the central and eastern Aleutians, with a broad area of 35 to 45 knot winds in the Gulf, as well as coming across areas of the Alaska Peninsula and back through the Aleutian chain. So as we would expect with those type of winds, 5,000 feet aloft, and with the various troughs, frontal systems, that there could be some surface turbulence, surface to 8,000 foot turbulence there in the central Alaska range, an area surface to 6,000 feet moderate turbulence along areas of the Panhandle, and then back to the west, a broad area of moderate turbulence from around Bristol Bay, the Alaska Peninsula, Kodiak Island, southwestward all along the Aleutian chain.
So the sun, looking here from the ground, seems very constant and quiet, but actually when we look at it from space, we can see it's quite turbulent and active. Space weather is activity on the sun and in a near-Earth space that can affect our technological infrastructure and society. The sun is constantly spewing out a stream of particles called the solar wind that goes out into the solar system. And it affects us here near Earth, where we're protected by a magnetic field. The interaction between the solar wind and the magnetic field can cause space weather. The Carrington event is the largest storm we've seen in recorded history when we're looking at space weather. But every solar cycle, which repeats about every 11 years, one estimate estimates that there's a 10% chance of getting a large storm like the Carrington event that could impact us here on Earth. But we see solar storms almost all the time. And these storms have an effect on our technological infrastructure. Solar storms can cause activity in Earth's atmosphere and magnetosphere that can damage electrical power grids that power our communities, interrupt radio and satellite communications, and can cause our GPS navigation to fail. NOAA is working with its international partners to ensure that we have different vantage points where we can observe space weather. Our space weather observing infrastructure from space includes the NOAA Discover satellite and the NASA ACE satellite that are stationed upstream of Earth to give us a first buoy measurement of the solar wind. It also includes the ESA-NASA SOHO satellite and the NASA Stereo satellite that image the sun and also make coronagraph measurements of the outer atmosphere of the sun, the corona, that can tell us when large explosions happen off the sun. We also observe the sun and the Earth's magnetic field from the geostationary location with NOAA's GOES. So the way we use the space weather information from satellites and from the ground is to be able to make forecasts and predictions, just like we do with hurricanes and terrestrial weather. We observe the sun and look for activity and see how it develops, and see if it's going to culminate into a large explosion that can affect us here on Earth. NOAA is working with its international partners to expand our observing capability. We're committed to observing along the Sun-Earth line. So we're going to do the imaging of the sun and the upstream buoy measurements of the solar wind along the Sun-Earth axis. The more we understand about the sun, the more we can prepare for it and become, just like we are a weather-ready nation, become a space weather-ready nation. And as we look forward to humans exploring out into the solar system and advancing our space commerce activities, space weather becomes more and more important.
Here at the Space Weather Prediction Center, we monitor space activity as it's occurring back at the sun, and then we issue out a forecast as well as alerts, watches, and warnings as activity is occurring. A typical space weather event would start with a solar flare back at the sun. That solar flare is short-lived and produces fairly short-lived impacts as well, basically impacting communications on the daylit side of the Earth. However, some solar flares are also associated with a coronal mass ejection or an eruption of plasma that's blasted off the sun and out into space. As forecasters, it's our job to determine if that cloud of plasma is moving towards Earth, and if it comes towards Earth, what the potential impacts may be. Those impacts can range from a fairly low-level storm that may produce the aurora a little bit farther south than usual, or can range up into fairly significant magnetic disturbances that don't happen very often, but when they do, they can impact technologies and infrastructure here on Earth. We provide information to lots of different user groups, from airlines to the electric power grid to emergency managers, aviation, satellite community, lots of different customers.
And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Welcome back, and we start the marine weather segment as we usually do with the sea ice edge. Ice is extensive throughout the Arctic coast down through the Chukchi Sea and then the Bering Strait. We're not anticipating any really strong winds through this area, but the cold air mass, a bitter cold air mass, continues to sit over the northwestern quadrant of the mainland, and this will just tend to keep the ice in place, and really no warm-ups are anticipated here. Temperatures are going to average below normal across much of the state here for the next couple of weeks. With the colder air, there's going to be another push of it work its way down along the west and southwest coast, I think, over the weekend. So this is going to maintain and maybe even expand this ice edge a little further south. We can expect with northerly flow the ice to advance southward, and with the colder temperatures, even a little bit of new ice development along the ice edge as a result of these below normal temperatures. And looking at the inner channels of the southeast panhandle, winds on Wednesday will be south-southeast, 25 knots. Waves generally running 4 to 5 feet from Dixon Entrance up through Stevens Passage and Lynn Canal. Outer coast winds south-southeast, 20 to 25 knots, maybe as high as 30 knots there west of Gustavus, turning more easterly outside of Yakutat Bay. Waves generally running 7 to 9 feet. On Thursday, winds will be southeast to south, 10 knots across the inner channels with waves of 2 to maybe 3 feet Dixon Entrance. Generally west winds, though, along the outer coast within the nearshore waters within 15 nautical miles, around 20 knots, with waves 8 to 10 feet south of Gustavus down to off of Craig, but turning back toward the east at 10 knots there once you get west of Yakutat with 5-foot waves. Across the northwestern Gulf, kind of a mixed bag of winds. Easterly winds in Prince William Sound, 15 knots, waves 2 feet. But off the Kenai, westerly winds 20 knots, and winds will generally be southwest to west, highest through lower Cook Inlet toward the entrance of Cook Inlet, 25 knots, waves 7 to 8 feet. And on Thursday, Prince William Sound easterly winds 15 knots. Things are going to turn more north-northeasterly through the length of Cook Inlet at 20 knots with waves upwards of 5 feet at the entrance of Cook Inlet. Across Kodiak Island and the Alaska Peninsula on Wednesday, winds will generally be west to southwest at 20 to 25 knots, waves running 4, 5, 6 feet on the north side, though a little higher south of False Pass, 8 feet, and on the Bering side, 5, 6 foot waves there north of Port Huyden, but as high as 8 feet north of Cold Bay. And then across the area on Thursday, winds shift mainly to the northwest at 20 to 25 knots, waves running 4 to 6 feet on the North Pacific side and 6 or 7 feet on the Bering side. Across the Aleutian chain on Wednesday, a broad area of generally southwest winds 25 to 30 knots. Waves will generally be around 10 to 13 feet eastern and central Aleutians on the North Pacific side, 7 to 10 feet on the Bering side, little higher waves west of Adak as would be expected. And then winds on Thursday will be predominantly out of the northwest, right around 30 knots across the eastern Aleutians, 20 to 25 knots through the central Aleutians with waves of 7 to 10 feet on the North Pacific side and generally 7 to 9 feet on the Bering side. And across the western southwest coast, winds will be north through Norton Sound 25 knots, northeast to north winds along the YK Delta through Etolan Strait, and southwesterly into Bristol Bay at 20 knots. Waves could be as high as 10 to 12 feet around St. Matthew and St. Paul. And then on Thursday, notice a more northerly component to the wind across much of the area at 20 to as high as 25 knots. This could cause the ice to shift a little further south, plus the cold temperatures could allow for some newer ice development along the leading edge, the southern edge of the pack ice. And then finally across the Arctic on Wednesday, southwest to west winds 20-25 knots as you get east of Utqiagvik, but then those north winds take over through the Chukchi Sea that turn westerly into Kotzebue Sound at 20 knots and northerly 15 to 20 knots through the Bering Strait and on the north side of St. Lawrence. And then finally, looking at Thursday, winds will be out of the west-northwest 15 to 20 knots along the Arctic coast, Utqiagvik, Katovik, but more northerly winds through the Chukchi Sea, 20 to 25 knots and 25 knots through the Bering Strait on the north side of St. Lawrence, as well as northerly winds within the confines of Norton Sound.
These forecasts are for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating.